Around 4,600 years ago, in an age when things like the wheel and iron were still beyond human reach, how did people manage to raise these sky-high mountains of stone? This is not a story of gold, silver, or some mighty king. This is the story of the human being who left hunting behind and gave birth to one of the greatest and most mysterious civilizations the world has ever seen. A civilization that outlasted both sand and time and created something that still feels beyond our imagination. By the end of this video, you will uncover the secret behind that lost technology and the unstoppable human spirit that made it possible. The same spirit that has left even modern engineers wondering how it was done. We will peel back every layer of the mystery one by one, from the vanished river that carried the stones on its back to the hidden chambers whose purpose still remains unknown. So come with me as we travel back in time to an age when the impossible was made real. Before we go any further, a small request. Watch this video all the way to the end, because today we are about to begin an unforgettable journey through ancient history. Videos like this take hours of deep research to create. If you enjoy it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This story begins with wandering hunters, people who lived only to somehow fill their stomachs. So what changed? What made them settle along the Nile River and eventually build one of the greatest wonders on Earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza? This is a story of stone and passion, of faith and engineering. This is the story of Egypt. Around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age was coming to an end, the Earth began to warm. North Africa, once greener and more alive, was slowly turning into desert. Water sources were drying up, and life was becoming harder by the day. In the middle of this upheaval, our ancestors, early human hunter-gatherers, were roaming in small bands in search of survival. They had only one goal: somehow find food and stay alive in a world full of wild animals. That search brought them to a place that felt like a miracle: the Nile River. This was not just a river, it was the heartbeat of life. Every year, the Nile flooded, and when the waters receded, they left behind a layer of rich, black, fertile soil. That soil was so incredibly powerful that crops could spring up almost by simply scattering seeds into this wet soil. These early humans noticed this miracle, and at some point, someone must have thought for the very first time, what if we intentionally press the seeds of these wild grains into this wet soil? Maybe then we would never have to go hungry again. And right there, humanity gave birth to one of the greatest inventions in history: agriculture. This change did not happen overnight. It unfolded over centuries. By around 6,000 to 7,000 BCE, they had planted their first crops of wheat and barley along the Nile. But there was a huge problem. The floodwater only stayed for a few weeks, and after that, the blazing sun could dry the fertile soil until it became as hard as stone. If the soil dried out, the crops were ruined. That challenge awakened the engineer hidden inside early humans. They realized that simply planting seeds was not enough. They had to control and hold back this life-giving water and guide it to their fields. Using simple tools made of stone and wood, they began digging canals from the Nile to their farmland. They built small mud embankments so that floodwater could collect in the fields through those canals and keep the ground moist for much longer. This was one of the world's first irrigation systems. Now they had grain for the entire year. Extra grain began to be stored in clay jars. They no longer needed to wander in search of food. They started settling in one place. Small huts appeared. Then those huts became settlements, and slowly, villages began to grow. Humans were no longer just hunters. They had become farmers. This was the Nile's first great gift, the gift that lifted wandering early humans onto the very first step of civilized life. But this was only the beginning. Now, these settlements were about to face a new challenge: human greed and violence. The smell of grain growing in the Nile's fertile soil was no longer reaching only the hard-working farmers. That scent was now spreading to the hungry and fierce desert tribes who were still wandering in search of prey. And then began a chapter in human history that still continues today: the struggle of plunder and conquest. Under the cover of darkness, armed raiders attacked these peaceful settlements. Grain grown through months of hard labor was stolen, and huts were burned to the ground. The farmers quickly understood that growing food was not enough. To protect it, they would have to unite. Out of this fear and insecurity, the idea of leadership was born. Villages came together and chose the strongest and wisest among them to serve as their protector. These chiefs formed groups of fighters who defended the village from outside attacks. Over time, some powerful chiefs brought nearby weaker villages under their protection as well. In this way, small kingdoms began to emerge. This process continued for centuries, and by around 3100 BCE, two major kingdoms had risen: Upper Egypt, the southern valley region, and Lower Egypt, the northern delta region. And then came a king whom history would remember forever. Traditionally, we know him as Narmer. Narmer was the ruler of Upper Egypt. He assembled a great army and conquered Lower Egypt. He united both lands into one single Egypt and declared himself the first pharaoh of all Egypt. A pharaoh was not just a king, he declared himself a living god. He was the son of the sun god Ra, sent to rule on earth. His word was law carved in stone. His command was the command of the gods. This one idea gave Egypt a kind of stability for thousands of years that had almost no equal, because now, to oppose the king was to oppose the divine. Under the pharaohs, Egypt advanced at an astonishing pace. They learned to write in a script called hieroglyphs. They created a calendar of 365 days so they could accurately predict the Nile's yearly flood. They mastered mathematics and geometry so that land could be measured and canals could be built with remarkable precision. But beneath all this progress and splendor, a deep fear lived in the minds of the Egyptians, the fear of death. They believed death was not the end of life, but the beginning of a journey into another world. They believed that every human being contained two spiritual essences, called the Ka and the Ba. After death, the Ba left the body to dwell among the gods, but the Ka, the life force, remained close to the body. For the Ka to survive, the body itself was still necessary. If the body was destroyed, the Ka would also die, and the dream of living forever would come to an end. This belief taught them the art of mummification. It was a complex process that took around 70 days. They removed the internal organs, such as the brain, stomach, and lungs, and stored them in separate jars, but the heart was left inside the body. They believed in the afterlife. Before Osiris, the god of judgment, a person's good and evil deeds would be weighed through the heart. After that, the body was dried for months in a salt called natron, and then wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen strips. Now the immortal body was ready, but how could it be protected from thieves and wild animals? The earliest pharaohs were buried in flat-roofed mud brick tombs called mastabas, but these were not secure. Thieves often broke into them and stole the treasures buried inside. Around 2670 BCE, a genius architect named Imhotep, serving Pharaoh Djoser, came up with a revolutionary idea. He placed a smaller mastaba on top of a larger one, then a third, then a fourth, and in this way, by stacking 6 massive stone platforms one above the other, he created a stepped structure. When the dust settled, the people of Egypt were stunned. This was the world's first pyramid, the Step Pyramid. For the first time, humanity had built an artificial mountain on Earth. But human ambition never stops for long. Decades later, Pharaoh Sneferu decided that he did not want a stepped pyramid. He wanted a perfectly smooth, geometrically precise sides, sloping evenly on 4 faces. His engineers enthusiastically began the work, but they made a terrifying mathematical mistake. At first, they started raising the stones at a very steep angle of 54 degrees. When the pyramid was more than halfway completed, the engineers realized the structure was becoming unstable and could collapse. They immediately reduced the angle of the upper section to 43 degrees. The result was the bent pyramid, a pyramid that visibly changes shape in the middle. Learning from that mistake, Sneferu ordered the construction of another pyramid, the Red Pyramid, the world's first truly smooth-sided pyramid. Sneferu learned from the failures of the past and prepared a magnificent legacy for his son. And that son was none other than Khufu, the pharaoh who would commission the largest and most mysterious structure in history, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
around 2600 BCE, on the orders of Pharaoh Khufu, Egypt's engineers began work on a project so vast that even today it sends chills down the spine. On the Giza Plateau, they began building history's largest single structure, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let's take a moment to understand the staggering scale of this. Nearly 2.3 million stone blocks were used to build this pyramid. Most of them were made of limestone, with an average weight of about 2.5 tons, roughly the weight of a large SUV. But that is not even the most shocking part. For the inner chambers, especially the
King's Chamber, massive granite blocks were brought from a place called Aswan, nearly 800 kilometers away. Some of these blocks weighed between 50 and 80 tons, about the combined weight of 12 elephants. When it was finally completed, its height was 481 feet, or 146.6 meters. That is roughly the height of a modern 40-story building. And it held this title not for 1 or 2 centuries, but for an unbelievable 3,800 years. It was only in the 14th century, when England's Lincoln Cathedral was built, that humanity finally created a structure taller than it. Its base spreads across more than 13 acres of land, large enough to fit 10 major football fields. It is estimated that the pyramid's total weight was more than 5.7 million tons. For comparison, the world's tallest building today, Dubai's Burj Khalifa, weighs around 500,000 tons in total. That means the Great Pyramid alone is more than 11 times heavier than the Burj Khalifa. And perhaps the most astonishing part of all is this. This colossal structure was built in an estimated 20 to 27 years. That means if workers labored 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, they would have had to place one massive stone block in exactly the right position every 5 minutes. All of this without cranes, without steel, and without modern machinery. The scale is so enormous that it feels almost impossible. It is a puzzle that has baffled explorers, historians, and scientists for centuries. How did they actually do it? How were such massive stones cut from the quarries? How were they transported hundreds of kilometers to the Giza Plateau? And the biggest question of all, how were stones weighing from 2.5 tons all the way up to 80 tons lifted to a height of 481 feet? That is the question that takes us to the very heart of this story, where, through centuries-old theories and astonishing recent discoveries, we try to lift the veil on this mystery. For centuries, the construction of the Great Pyramid was buried in speculation and legend. Some said it was the work of countless slaves whipped to death. Others suggested supernatural forces or even alien intervention. But archaeological discoveries from recent decades have revealed a completely different story and a far more impressive one. This is the story of human intelligence, organization, and extraordinary engineering. So let's break this process down step by step. 2 main types of stone were used for the pyramid. The main body was built with yellow-brown limestone quarried just south of the Giza Plateau. Craftsmen used copper chisels and wooden mallets. They cut cracks into the stone, then hammered in wooden wedges and soaked them with water. As the wet wood expanded, the stone split cleanly along the crack. But for the outer layer of the pyramid, called the casing stones, they used brilliant white Tura limestone. This stone came from quarries across the Nile at Tura. These casing stones were cut and polished so precisely that when the pyramid was new, it must have looked in the desert sun like a giant shining diamond. For the King's Chamber and the heavy internal structural sections, granite was brought from Aswan 800 kilometers to the south, and here lay one of the greatest mysteries. How exactly was an 80-ton granite block moved across 800 kilometers? For decades, archaeologists believed the stones must have been transported on boats along the Nile, but today the Nile flows several kilometers away from the Giza Plateau. So were these giant stones dragged for miles across the desert? The answer to this puzzle came from a groundbreaking study published between 2022 and 2024.
Using radar satellite imagery and soil samples, scientists made an astonishing discovery. They found that 4,500 years ago, a massive lost branch of the Nile, which researchers named the Ahramat branch, once flowed right past the pyramid construction site. This branch was about 64 kilometers long and deep enough for large boats to move through it with ease. This discovery changed everything. It proved that the ancient Egyptians did not need to drag stones for miles across the desert. They loaded the enormous blocks directly onto large wooden barges at the quarries, and through this Ahramat branch of the Nile, transported them straight to harbors built at Giza, just meters away from the pyramid itself. Over time, because of climate change and drought, this river branch dried up and was buried under the desert sands, taking with it the pyramid's greatest construction secret. But once the stones reached the site, the real challenge began. How were they lifted to a height of 481 feet? The most widely accepted theory involves ramps. But what kind of ramp? One theory proposes a long, straight ramp rising alongside the pyramid, but to reach a height of 481 feet at a safe incline, that ramp would have needed to stretch for almost 1.5 kilometers, requiring more stone than the pyramid itself. That is why another theory became more popular, the spiral ramp. According to this theory, a ramp wrapped around the pyramid like a snake as it rose upward. This reduced the ramp's length. Workers placed the stones on wooden sledges and hauled them up these ramps. In 2014, an experiment showed that if the sand in front of the sledges was slightly wet, friction could be reduced by as much as 50%, making the stones far easier to pull. Another recent and fascinating theory comes from French architect Jean-Pierre Houdon. He believes that an external ramp was used only for the lower part of the pyramid. For the upper section, the Egyptians may have built an internal ramp that spiraled upward inside the pyramid, just behind the outer walls. This theory helps explain some irregularities left at the pyramid's corners, and it may also account for the existence of hidden spaces, like the Big Void discovered in 2017 by the Scan Pyramids project. Hollywood movies have planted the image in our minds that millions of slaves built the pyramids and were worked to death with brutal cruelty. But archaeological evidence completely rejects that story. Near the pyramids, archaeologists discovered the remains of an entire workers' town. Analysis of the skeletons found there shows that these people were well fed. They were regularly given meat, bread, and beer. Their bones do show signs of fractures, but those fractures had healed, which tells us they also received medical treatment. These were not slaves, but skilled, respected craftsmen and laborers. It is estimated that around 20,000 to 30,000 workers were active at one time, working in rotating crews. Many of them were farmers who came to work on the pyramids during the Nile's yearly flood season, when their own fields were underwater. For them, this was not only a source of income, but also a sacred duty in service of their living god, the pharaoh. Their tombs were too built near the pyramid with honor and respect. Slaves were never given that treatment. So the pyramid was not the product of supernatural power, but of an unbelievably organized society. A society with powerful leadership in the form of the pharaoh, limitless resources in the form of the Nile, deep motivation in the belief in eternal life, and above all, the minds and hard work of thousands of skilled and dedicated human beings. But have all the mysteries been solved? Absolutely not. Even though science and archaeology have answered many questions, the Great Pyramid of Giza is still filled with mysteries that challenge mainstream thinking. These puzzles force us to ask, do we really know the whole story? The pyramid's engineering is astonishing not only in its size, but in its precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned with the Earth's four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with incredible accuracy. Its sides deviate from true north by a tiny fraction of a degree.
Pyramids of Giza were not just tombs for pharaohs, they were symbols of an entire civilization's ambition, faith, and ingenuity. They are proof of what human beings can achieve when they unite around a shared goal and a powerful belief. They showed us that the greatest obstacles are not broken by hammers and chisels alone, but by organization, planning, and determination.
The true secret of the Great Pyramid may not lie in alien technology or lost magical powers. Its real secret is hidden in the sweat of the 20,000 workers who every day dragged stone beneath the burning sun. It is hidden in the minds of the engineers who look to the stars for direction and use the laws of mathematics to shape a perfect structure. And it is hidden in the faith within the hearts of the people who believed they were building merely a tomb for a king, but an eternal home for their God. The pyramids of Giza teach us one simple yet profound truth. Greatness is born from struggle. Just as the challenge of the Nile's flood made the Egyptians some of the world's first engineers, in the same way, the fear of death made them some of the most incredible builders the world has ever seen. They remind us that the people we call primitive were not primitive at all. They simply had different tools, but their minds, their creativity, and their ambition were every bit as powerful as ours are today. Perhaps we will never solve every mystery completely. Perhaps some doors will remain closed forever. And perhaps that is the true beauty of the pyramids. They will keep inspiring us to question, to search, and to remain in awe. So the next time someone asks you how early humans built these massive pyramids, tell them this is not a story of magic. It is a story of human spirit. It is the story of the Nile and its children who left such a mark on stone that even thousands of years of time could not erase it. What do you think? Was this entirely the triumph of human engineering, or is some deeper secret still buried beneath the sands? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious world of Egypt, like this video, share it with your friends, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more historical and mysterious stories like this. Be sure to press the bell icon so you can join us on our next discovery. Thanks for watching.